Princess Anne, the monarchy's unwavering backbone, was seen leaving the council room in tears. 5 words pierced the palace corridors. "It's over." Eyewitnesses froze. Council members paled. The stoic princess, known for enduring decades of royal storms without faltering, had just faced a verdict that shook her to the core. But who said it? And what exactly had ended? Was it a matter of personal grief or the collapse of a royal legacy? Sources say Anne whispered the words with quiet finality, a sigh carrying decades of duty undone. Phones buzzed in the halls. Advisors avoided eye contact. Emergency NDAs were rushed for signatures, a rare move, signaling the institution itself was at stake. Anne's tears were not weakness. They were the first visible cracks in a lifetime of loyalty. Staff described her silence as heavier than outrage, a stunned reverence tinged with fear. One anonymous aide said it wasn't grief, but the realization that her sacred mission, entrusted by Queen Elizabeth herself, had been quietly dismantled. For decades, Anne's presence was the monarchy's steel spine. She was the silent stabilizer, the keeper of legacies, the executor of Elizabeth's private mandates. And yet, behind palace walls, quiet tensions had been growing. Disputes over council decisions, strategic shifts in succession oversight, and subtle sidelining by those once considered allies had begun eroding her influence. Charles, increasingly swayed by Camilla, reportedly restructured internal processes without consulting Anne. Key documents, previously routed through her office, were redirected. Her guidance on succession planning, once vital, was quietly marked as non-essential. The Queen's legacy, the one Anne had safeguarded meticulously, was being reclassified, minimized, even erased. Even William and Catherine, allies by blood and spirit, had remained neutral during critical votes. Their silence, interpreted as complicity, stung deeper than any confrontation. Camilla's influence, once peripheral, had grown undeniable. And the internal war that Anne had prepared for her entire life was now arriving at her doorstep. Anne's final confrontation was private. No cameras, no aides, just 2 siblings, protocol, and history between them. Charles, firm yet apologetic, delivered the words that would echo through the palace. Duty must evolve, even when it severs tradition. Anne, with the weight of decades of loyalty, understood immediately. The role she had believed inviolable was now obsolete. Yet even as her authority was stripped, Anne was not defeated. Behind the scenes, she activated a long-standing contingency, a secret legacy protocol codenamed Glenmore. A vault of letters, legal safeguards, and strategic measures designed to protect the monarchy in case internal integrity faltered. The palace believed she had retreated, but she was preparing her move, quietly orchestrating the preservation of Queen Elizabeth's final vision. Anne's silence was strategy, not surrender, and while the monarchy teeters on the edge, her next steps could reshape the crown's future. The palace corridors never felt colder. Anne, once the invisible hand guiding royal continuity, now walked past portraits of monarchs she had served without question, carrying the weight of a decision she hadn't anticipated. Her aides say she moved with deliberate calm, but her mind raced. Every file, every decree, every whispered council discussion now carried a new, chilling context. The crown she had shielded for decades suddenly felt less like her duty and more like a battlefield. Sources reveal a private council meeting weeks earlier had foreshadowed this fracture. Anne had confronted Charles on subtle adjustments to advisory protocols, changes that would strip her influence from succession planning and legacy oversight. In that meeting, she reportedly argued with conviction, her voice unshaken, insisting that loyalty and service should not be dismissed. Charles's answer was blunt. We all must accept change, even when it offends the past. The implications of those words echoed far beyond the chamber. Anne had long been the anchor for Elizabeth's vision, the secret stabilizer during crises, the keeper of sensitive correspondences, and the guardian of succession clarity. Yet now, with Charles embracing a new inner circle influenced by Camilla, Anne's role was quietly being erased. Her legacy ledger, an archive of letters, secret plans, and directives, was marked for reassignment. Her influence, once the silent backbone of the crown, was under stealth removal. Observers note that William's absence during this pivotal council session added salt to the wound. Allies say Anne expected at least tacit support from her nephew, but instead, William sided with Camilla's agenda. His words, described by insiders as clinical yet cutting, left Anne stunned. We need a new guard, less resistance, more relevance. In that moment, decades of trust were fractured. Anne, who had silently shielded William and Catherine from palace turbulence, now faced a cold realignment. But the princess is no stranger to adversity. Insiders confirm she immediately activated protocols Elizabeth had prepared for decades, measures so secret even Charles may not fully understand their scope. Codenamed Glenmore, this initiative ensures that Anne retains control over critical archives, succession insights, and contingency plans in case internal shifts threaten the monarchy's stability. She wasn't retreating, she was recalibrating. In the days following, Anne conducted a series of discreet, high-level meetings with Catherine and Lady Louise. No press, no entourage. Discussions with confidential, focused on safeguarding Queen Elizabeth's vision while countering the quiet consolidation of power by Camilla's faction. Witnesses claim these interactions were decisive. Catherine, often seen as the modernizing bridge to the next generation, emerged resolute, visibly aligned with Anne's protective strategy. Even Camilla's team reportedly noticed the change. Internal channels detected subtle pushes to mitigate Anne's influence, but the princess, backed by protocols, allies, and her own decades of strategic foresight, remained steps ahead. She had turned the palace's quiet machinations into a chessboard where she controlled key pieces, ensuring the monarchy's future would not bend entirely to expedience. Anne's actions sent a quiet but unmistakable message. Loyalty may be challenged, influence may be undermined, and trust may fracture, but the crown's legacy, the heart of Elizabeth's reign, would not be surrendered without a fight. The palace had never witnessed such a delicate balancing act. Anne's quiet determination reverberated through corridors usually ruled by protocol and polite distance. Staff report an almost tangible tension, the kind that doesn't announce itself with drama, but lingers unseen, infiltrating every meeting and memorandum. Every aide, every council member suddenly felt the weight of choices they had never fully appreciated. Anne's strategic moves weren't public. They couldn't be. Every step had to maintain the facade of normalcy while subtly reclaiming influence. The activation of Glenmore allowed her to control access to sensitive archives, including personal letters, succession documents, and private council notes. These weren't ceremonial tools, they were instruments of power, carefully deployed to ensure the monarchy's foundation remained intact, even as internal players attempted to redraw the lines of authority. Insiders revealed that the discovery of Prince Philip's long-hidden letters further intensified Anne's resolve. Within those pages lay warnings, meticulously encrypted, predicting the risks of a crown left vulnerable to shifting loyalties. Philip had written of influence outweighing inheritance, of expedience trumping tradition, and had explicitly emphasized Anne's role as the stabilizing force. Reading the letters, Anne realized that her lifelong mission wasn't over. It had merely been tested. Even as the public remained unaware, her maneuvers were swift. Private communications, coded directives, and late-night strategy sessions unfolded behind palace walls. Catherine's measured elegance played a key role. She was not just a witness, but an active participant, coordinating discreetly to shield Anne's initiatives from prying eyes. Lady Louise, young but sharp, handled logistical nuances with precision, ensuring critical documents remained secure. Together, this alliance became a quiet yet formidable counterbalance to Camilla's growing influence. Royal insiders describe a shift in the palace's internal culture. Meetings that once moved predictably now carried an edge, a subtle awareness that Anne was no longer sidelined. Even those accustomed to centuries of rigid hierarchy noted that her presence or absence could tilt outcomes without a single word being spoken. Anne had mastered the art of silent command, a skill honed over decades of unacknowledged labor. And yet, even as she acted, Anne remained outwardly composed. Witnesses report her public engagements were unchanged, her disciplined demeanor intact, her face a mask of calm. But staff who observed her in private described moments of quiet intensity, poised, deliberate, calculating. The princess was no longer reacting, she was orchestrating, threading a path that safeguarded the crown without igniting a scandal that could fracture public trust. The ripple effects reached unexpected corners. Small symbolic gestures, the placement of a brooch, the timing of public appearances, even the subtle alignment of family schedules served as signals to loyalists. To the untrained eye, these were mundane royal routines. To insiders, they were markers of allegiance, proof that Anne's quiet influence was quietly reclaiming space even in a palace increasingly dominated by Camilla's faction. By the end of the week, the palace operated under a new, unspoken tension. Those once confident in Camilla's ascendancy began to question the permanence of her hold. Charles himself reportedly noticed subtle shifts in information flow, a change in council dynamics, and the quiet resurgence of a figure he had assumed fully sidelined. Anne's presence, though not loud, was undeniable. Her next moves promised to be decisive. The monarchy's future, carefully curated over decades, hung in the balance. Anne's silent strategy was no longer a behind-the-scenes effort. It had evolved into a test of wills, a high-stakes game where loyalty, trust, and legacy collided. And as insiders whispered, one fact was clear: Princess Anne was far from finished. The palace corridors hummed with a tension that hadn't existed in decades. Every step Anne took, every document she touched was scrutinized, not by the public, but by the invisible chess players of the royal inner circle. Even minor adjustments to schedules or council agendas were now interpreted as signals of alignment or defiance. Anne had transformed her silence into influence, a weapon more precise than any spoken declaration. In private, aides describe her as laser-focused, reviewing legacy documents line by line, cross-referencing personal directives left by Queen Elizabeth with newly unearthed notes from Philip. Each detail mattered. Every clause in succession law was a lever, and Anne knew how to operate them without drawing attention. The Glenmore Protocol, once dormant, was now a blueprint for her silent strategy, allowing her to anticipate moves from Camilla, Charles, and even William. Catherine, too, became an essential ally. She balanced visibility with discretion, attending public engagements with composure, while secretly coordinating with Anne to fortify the Wales family's influence over strategic decisions. A trusted source revealed that Catherine's interventions were subtle yet transformative, reshuffling advisors, adjusting meeting flows, and ensuring that critical reports reached Anne before Camilla's faction could intercept. Together, mother and daughter-in-law formed a quiet yet unbreakable line of defense, a protective web woven through palace bureaucracy. Meanwhile, Camilla's attempts to consolidate power grew increasingly desperate. Courtiers noted that her instructions were no longer met with unquestioned obedience. Minor missteps, delayed responses, ambiguous interpretations, withheld reports hinted at a silent resistance taking root. Anne's influence wasn't public, but it was felt. Couriers, aides, and junior staff were now unwitting participants in a delicate dance where allegiance shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly. The tipping point came when Anne orchestrated the first coordinated disclosure to select archivists and legal advisors. Critical documents, previously considered routine, were flagged under new emergency protocols. One insider described it as activating a hidden skeleton key within the palace's administrative machinery. Those unaware of the context may have thought it an internal reorganization, but to the initiated, it was the princess reclaiming authority that had been quietly eroded over months. Even within the royal family, tensions flared. William, long perceived as Anne's ally, purportedly hesitated when briefed on the full scope of her actions. Some insiders claim he privately questioned whether Anne's moves were strategic brilliance or overreach. Catherine's subtle guidance helped him navigate this uncertainty, ensuring the Wales faction remained coordinated without fracturing the fragile family equilibrium. Publicly, Anne maintained her calm, attending ceremonial events, hosting dignitaries, and upholding the image of stoicism she had perfected over a lifetime. Privately, however, her schedule was relentless. Meetings in hidden chambers, encrypted communications, and confidential briefings filled her days. Sources reveal she was preparing contingency plans for every conceivable palace disruption, from legal challenges to sudden shifts in council allegiances. Observers who caught glimpses of her in this period describe a woman transformed, not emotionally, but strategically. The princess, who had once been the silent backbone of the monarchy, was now the hidden hand guiding its course. Every whisper, every decision, every gesture was calculated to ensure that the legacy entrusted to her by Elizabeth and Philip remained intact. And yet, the palace remained unaware of the full extent of her moves. Camilla, Charles, and even William had only partial knowledge of the coordinated strategy unfolding behind closed doors. Anne's influence was quiet, invisible, but unassailable. Insiders confirmed, for the first time in decades, the monarchy's internal power balance had shifted without a single public declaration. The storm was approaching, but Anne was no longer waiting for it to arrive. She was preparing to meet it head-on. The next moves would determine whether the monarchy survived internal fractures or whether Anne's silent resurgence would redefine its future forever. The ripple effect of Anne's strategy began to manifest in ways the palace never anticipated. Royal aides reported that subtle shifts in council decisions, minor delays in approvals, and quietly enforced protocols started to signal a new order. Anne's influence, once assumed to be waning, was quietly asserting itself, ensuring that key decisions aligned with the vision Elizabeth had entrusted to her. It was invisible authority in motion, unseen but undeniable. Publicly, Anne's appearances remained polished and unshakable. Every handshake, every ceremonial smile, every interaction was meticulously calculated to reinforce her image as the unwavering anchor of the monarchy. Yet insiders revealed she was also sending deliberate signals. A carefully chosen brooch, a discreet reference in conversation, a subtle seating arrangement, all were coded messages to those loyal to her cause. The palace hierarchy was learning that Anne's silence did not equal submission. Meanwhile, the internal tension reached a fever pitch. Camilla, sensing the shift but unable to identify its source, intensified her attempts to consolidate influence. Courtiers loyal to her reported faster memos, stricter directives, and strategic public appearances intended to overshadow Anne's quiet authority. But each move was met with countermeasures orchestrated behind closed doors by Anne and her allies. Every attempt to suppress her influence was quietly neutralized, leaving the palace in a state of invisible stalemate. The pivotal moment came when Anne activated the Glenmore Protocol fully. The vaults containing Queen Elizabeth's confidential directives were reviewed, annotated, and redistributed to trusted intermediaries. Legal safeguards, succession plans, and strategic communications were now layered with contingencies designed to withstand interference. Sources describe it as a masterstroke of foresight, a shield that secured the monarchy's integrity without public spectacle. Even William and Catherine were drawn deeper into this quiet revolution. The Wales faction coordinated with Anne, ensuring that new initiatives, patronages, and public engagements strengthened the monarchy's continuity while bypassing Camilla's faction. Reports from close aides suggested that Catherine's calm guidance provided balance, preventing any overt confrontations while still enforcing Anne's strategic intent. Together, the sister and daughter-in-law formed a covert alliance, a silent force that reshaped the royal command structure without triggering scandal. The first public signs of this subtle upheaval appeared in media coverage. Analysts noticed a renewed focus on Anne's contributions, highlighting her decades of service, her unwavering dedication, and her strategic foresight. Social media erupted, celebrating Anne as a symbol of loyalty and wisdom, while critics of Camilla's growing influence gained fresh ammunition. Polls indicated surging public admiration for Anne, a stark contrast to whispers of dissatisfaction with other members of the royal inner circle. Yet the final defining moment was Anne's private confrontation with Charles. Behind closed doors, the siblings met once more, not in anger, but in measured authority. Anne laid out the framework she had implemented, the safeguarding of Elizabeth's legacy, the reinforcement of the monarchy's operational integrity, and the contingencies for internal disputes. Sources describe Charles as visibly moved, acknowledging the necessity of her measures, even as he retained ceremonial oversight. By the time the palace emerged from this quiet upheaval, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Anne, the unassuming stalwart of the crown, had transformed from sidelined advisor into the hidden architect of royal continuity. Her quiet moves ensured that the monarchy could navigate internal strife, generational tensions, and evolving public expectations without collapse. As the public celebrated her steadfast dedication, the palace corridors remained tense but orderly. The chessboard of power had been reset, and Anne's influence was now impossible to ignore. The royal family may have thought the battle was over, but insiders knew the truth. Anne had not only survived the storm, she had quietly mastered it, and the monarchy would never be the same.